Hello and welcome into the Next Gen podcast here on the Bluff City Media Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Bryson Wright, and I'm joined by my co host, Alex Winton. And it's been a really tough week for the Grizzlies. Obviously, I feel like we try to be the more positive people when it comes to this, but there's not really many positives you can take from this first week. Grizzlies are the last team in the NBA to get a win, starting 0-5. Obviously, not the way you want to start. Some really tough games. Those first couple games were really tough. I know we talked last week about that Pelicans game. It was really close. The Nuggets game, I felt like they played really well. And then a couple games where it was just bad all around. Like that Wizards game was just pretty bad all around. And I'll say the same about that Jazz game. That Jazz game to go 0-5, really that first quarter was probably, not probably, it was the worst quarter of basketball they've played in a while. Like, I don't know if I'd even say going back the last 2-3 seasons. Like it might have been the worst quarter of basketball, besides, of course, that game. What was it, game 4 and game 6 last year? Yeah, those two. But besides that, this is probably the worst quarter of regular season basketball I've seen the Grizzlies play. And it was just really disappointing to see, just not just the slow start. Obviously, with the injuries and stuff like that, that was going to be an issue. But it just really feels like the vibes of the team in general are just off too. Like that's something that I felt. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff when it comes to roster construction and guys that are out and stuff. But it really just feels like the team doesn't have the same kind of vibe and that they've had the last couple years. Obviously, it's hard to recreate that when you're losing games, so I get that. But yeah, it's just been a really tough start to the season. We're gonna get into all the reasons why we think they're 0-5, like our level of concern for the team and everything going forward, and then talking about the Grizzlies picking up Bismack Biyombo, which maybe I almost called him Grizzmack Biyombo. Maybe we should call him that. That'd be pretty funny. But yeah, Bismack Biyombo coming to the team and everything like that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But we got to start with the reasons why the Grizzlies are 0-5. And it's really simple to me. They can't guard the 3-point line. Like that's the number one issue for me. They are giving up the most threes in the NBA over the first 5 games. They've given up the most 3-pointers in NBA history, right? So you're giving up the most 3-pointers in the history of the NBA through the first 5 games. And on the other end, they've been the second least efficient team offensively. They have the worst offensive rating in the NBA. In terms of field goal percentage, they have the second lowest field goal percentage. So it's one of those things where when on defense, you're consistently leaving guys open. And it's partly because of overhelping and stuff like that. It's partly because of some defensive miscues. I got to give a shout out to my guy Marco. Marco Can't Dunk on Twitter. He had a really good thread that I watched from it was just from the first quarter of the Mavericks game of just going back and rewatching and seeing like some of the defensive miscues they've really made. And it just really feels like when it comes to they're trying to, help out on shooters and stuff, or they're trying to help people in the paint way too much instead of helping out on shooters. And they're leaving really good shooters open. Obviously, there are some times where maybe that's part of the game plan to leave people open. But I'll go back to that Mavericks game. There is a couple times where I saw like either Xavier Tillman, like I saw Xavier Tillman helping off of Grant Williams to help Jaren in the paint. And I'm like, dude, Grant Williams is shooting like 60% from 3 this season. Like, he's not going to keep that up. But, like, that's not the dude on the team that you should be leaving wide open, right? And I feel like there's just a lot of that. And then in that Jazz game, it felt like Clarkson was getting Jordan Clarkson was open as soon as the game started. And he was open the entire game. It felt like him and Lauri Markkanen were open the entire game, man. It was actually crazy. Kelly Olynyk was hitting those above the break threes as well, which he is firmly on the Grizzly killer list as well. So a lot of stuff like that. But I think those are the two things that the Grizzlies have to fix is one, the 3-point defense. They cannot guard the 3-point line like this in today's NBA. They will get roasted every game. And it's that simple. And then offensively, you got to make layups and you got to make open shots. And they just haven't done any of that so far this season.
Yeah, I had to take a deep dive real quick because man, did not expect us to be 0-5. Um, I mean, I thought obviously it'd be a little bit of adjustment, but yeah, 0-5 is crazy. Low key, I just gotta laugh about it just because of how it's happened and how like watching it, just thinking about it right now, rethinking about it. But yeah, to your point, those are really the main 2 points. I'd have to agree. Mainly the offense, like it just and again, I wanted to say this prefaces. We're gonna get into a layer about blame. Well, you know how I say blame pies and things of that nature, and we'll get into it. But since we're talking about the players and the coaches in general right now, I don't think it's a scheme thing because the scheme is fine. They're getting open looks now. Could they get a little bit more rim pressure at times? Yes, but at the same time, you also have to realize who the personnel is, right? But the process to me has looked good. Like I haven't really complained about the lack of ball movement. I maybe complain about the turnovers, but like the turnovers are more so on the players than the scheme is not working because they're getting open looks. They'll get open looks, but they just won't make them. Like, and I mean, won't make them at all. Like what you're referencing with the Jazz. Watching that game, I tweeted it. This is some of the worst offensive basketball I've seen. Like from a shot making perspective, like they can't make anything. In today's NBA, you're not going to win any games. I know we got to defend, and we'll get. I'm finna get to the defense, but like even Jenkins said it. Just often in the last game, their offense just didn't help them. Now they're giving up too many threes now to the point where, like I always say, margin of error. They don't have enough offensive talent to give up that amount of threes. So when you already can't make a wide open shots and wide open layups, you giving up that amount of threes is gonna put you behind the 8 ball even more. So you got to play even more perfect to win a basketball game, which is what's happening right now. And I mean, they've lost these games in a lot of different ways. But from the simple standpoint, first, they can't score enough. Like outside of Bane, Jaren, and Smart, and maybe Zaire at times, they have nobody else. Like I'm looking at it right now. Bane's averaging 25 basically. Jaren's averaging like 19. Smart's averaging 16. And then the next highest is Zaire at 10. And then everybody else is like at 8 or 6. Like you're just not going to win games like that at all. You're just not gonna win games like that if you're not getting any offensive production. And second, yeah, it's probably the defense in terms of the overhelping because the defense itself, like the rebounding, hasn't been as big of a thing as everybody made it. Was making it seem. But more so, it's the overhelping, like you said. Shout out to Marco. He had a good thread. I saw a little bit of it, a little bit of today. But yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was Sean Coleman. Shout out to Sean Coleman. He had a little stat up. Basically, every year for the last like 3 years, the Grizzlies have been bad in October and November in terms of overhelping and giving up threes. Like they always, for whatever reason, at the beginning of the season, give up a crazy amount of 3 pointers, and they usually adjust by December. And then the last 2 years, they've been top 10 at defending three. But the problem is this year, that adjustment has to come sooner. Is basically what he's saying, and I agree because with the way that how the injuries are set up with the roster and just how it is constructed, you can't give up this amount of threes so early because you don't have enough offensive firepower to overcome it. And so they really do probably. That's the thing I would say they need to really fix soon, because the offense. I mean, it's going. You just got to make shots. I mean, Jenkins can only do so much with that, but from the overhelping standpoint, he can make it a key thing in film to be like, hey, don't overhelp here, don't overhelp there, because there's just sometimes where they're just doing too much helping, especially when you have a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. down there. There's probably no reason to really help. You probably much rather give up the long two versus a wide open three to somebody, especially a guy that's getting catch and shoot shots. Like, granted, you want to give up the three, but you got to at least get a contest out there. They're usually late with the contest, things of that nature. So they got to clean that up. But yeah, I would agree. Those are the main two things so far that have really hurt them so far, and that they have to be better at. Like, especially the offense, man. You like you said, we're last in offensive rating. I think this one. If we looked at it, it's like 102.5. Like that's like a mid 2000s offensive rating in 2023. That's just not gonna work. I know again, NBA is not just a math game, like all analyticals, but at some point it's an offensive game. You got to make shots. So that's really my biggest thing. You got to find some offense. I don't know how, whether that's a transition, whether you play through Jaren, Bane, and Smart more. I don't know. You just gotta make shots. You just find some offense. I don't know how you're gonna find it, but somebody they're gonna have to find something because 102.5 ain't gonna get it done for an offense rate. It's just not gonna get it done in today's game. So they got to figure that out if they want to get a win.
Yeah, no, if your
Yeah.
offensive rating sounds like a radio station, like it's probably not good. Like I'm sorry. Like that's just not good, man. And I will say I think the defense does worry me a little bit more than the offense, just because I feel like when they do get Ja back eventually, he is going to help the offense a lot because I mean, what they really need is somebody that can put the ball on the floor and put pressure on the defense. When Marcus Smart has done it, it's worked really well for the Grizzlies offense, but teams are not as obviously not as scared of Marcus Smart driving the ball as they are of somebody of John Morant's caliber driving the ball. So he still doesn't have that same level of gravity. And I think you will see that with Desmond Bane, not necessarily with his shooting, like not with his scoring numbers, but with his shooting percentages. When Ja comes back, like right now, he's only shooting about 35% from three. But the reason is because he has to take so many more shots because he's basically, and sometimes he's the only guy out there that is even a reliable shooter at all. Like so he has to shoot it, and he's seeing so many different coverages as being that number one guy. I feel like offensively, adding Ja, go ahead and add 28 points a game, like basically is what you're doing, right? You know that he's gonna get his teammates involved, and it's also gonna help Bane. He's not going to be seeing the best defender every night anymore. And I think that's going to help him with his efficiency. So, like, offensively, I think they will be okay. I think that they are going to be able to figure it out. The reason why the defense worries me more than the offense is because these are some of the same trends that we saw last season, especially on the road last season. I feel like they had just a lot of issues when it came to guarding the three. And it's also what you saw in the playoff series against the Lakers when they let Rui Hachimura just go crazy from three because it's some of the same defensive scheme stuff. And it's like, okay, this dude is a 30% shooter, so we're going to help off of him. But he's not a 30% shooter when he's wide open. Like that's, and I think that's like the issue is like you look at it and it's like, oh, he only shoots 32% from three. Let's leave him open. I guarantee you it's not 32% on wide open threes. I guarantee you if he came out there before the game and he shot 33s, he's probably going to make 25 or 26 of them because he's in the NBA. And that's what NBA players do. When they're wide open, they make shots. Well, that's what they're supposed to do. And that's where we go to the other side of the Grizzlies not doing that. And that's the main issue. They're giving up, they're allowing teams to shoot over 44 or over 43% from three on them, and they're shooting below league average from three on the other end. They're giving up 18 threes a game, which is just a ridiculous number of threes per game, just to put it into context. Like 18 threes a game is insane. I know it might be a little bit of an outlier because in that Jazz game, I think the Jazz made the most threes that the Grizzlies have ever given up in a game, or something crazy like that. So that was a little bit of an outlier, but it comes down to defensively, they have to figure it out. Also, because as much as the Grizzlies have been a fun team that gets out on the fast break and high flying with John Moran and Desmond Bane shooting threes and all that on offense, we all know that the identity of this team starts on the defensive end. So if they are not good defensively, then you're cooked. Like it's that simple. Like if they have to start on the defensive end. That's how everything starts. That's how they get out in transition and everything like that. And they're not doing that. There's too many possessions that are ending in made shots and you can't get out and run. They need somebody to come out there. They need first of all, I think the rebounding has been better, but they have to get better at getting the rebound and then running. They don't have that, Ja Morant to get out there and push the pace a lot. As much as I do think Bane has still done a good job of getting downhill and stuff like that, I think they might need to see a little bit more of that from Marcus Smart, getting out and trying to run the break a little bit more to try to get some easy baskets. But the other issue is even when they have had easy baskets, they haven't made them. They're shooting really bad at the rim. I know in that last game against the Jazz in that first quarter, it felt like they were just missing a ton of layups. Like these are shots that they should make. So I will say we're going to get into some stuff about Taylor Jenkins as well, because I know a lot of people want to talk about him. And I will say, obviously, if your team is 0-5, part of it is on the coach. Like there's no doubt that part of it is on the coach, and Taylor Jenkins can be a better coach. And there are some things that Taylor Jenkins has shown this season that he has to get better at. And it's some of the same stuff we've been talking about the last couple of years. So I get why it's frustrating. But at the end of the day, Taylor Jenkins can't make the layups too. You know what I mean? Like sometimes these dudes, like there have been a lot of open looks, a lot of good looks inside that have just been missed. And it's partly because of injuries and stuff like that, and I get that. But with the roster as it currently looks, I still don't think they should be 0-5. Like that's just how I feel. I feel like they still do have enough with Desmond Bane, with Jaren. I mean, they also had that game where Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. both had 30. Marcus Smart has 23, and the rest of the team shoots like 27% from the floor, right? And it's like on a night like that, they just needed like one more person to step up. And I think that's another thing is they haven't had, like we've talked this whole offseason about how they need like one guy to step up. And hopefully it was going to be Zaire, which Zaire, I don't think he's played bad, but he hasn't played to the level they need him to play with the amount of guys they have out. And then you haven't gotten enough out of Roddy. You haven't gotten anything out of Jake LaRavia, like at all. To the point to where you now have like, Vince Williams Jr. is coming in and playing over him. And I'm 100% with that, because when you put somebody out there that their main thing is they're a shooter. And they don't, like Jake LaRavia is not a defender. He can't play defense. He gets cooked on defense. It's that simple, right? But you gotta make up for that by making shots. That's what he's out there to do. And then if you're not making shots, there's no reason for you to be on the floor. So Jake either needs to start making shots or they got to find somebody else to go in for him right now, because he's simply not ready for the role that they have him playing right now, which with having Santi Aldama back, adding Luke Kennard, he wouldn't be in that role. So I get that. But like, that's one of the, like, there are people playing right now that should not be getting minutes on a team that wants to contend. And I think that is the main issue. Now, with some injuries and stuff, obviously that's an issue. And when guys get back and they're closer to 100% healthy, some of these dudes aren't going to be playing. But like I said, they still shouldn't be 0-5. They still need more out of a couple of these bench guys if they want to, turn it around and at least be close to 500 when Ja gets back. Like that's really all I've been asking this whole time. And to dig yourself into that 0-5 hole with all the injuries and stuff that you have as well, it's just going to make it even harder.
Yeah. And see, I think that leads me to what I was going to talk about when you were talking about needing more offensive production and players that not need to be playing. And that's exactly why I've been, seeing like you were talking about the coaching and, all this other stuff on the timeline. And again, let me start with the Taylor Jenkins thing. And it's going to go hand in hand. Taylor Jenkins he has his flaws like every other coach. But I'm just going to say this now. When you have the roster that they do, currently as constructed with the context, most people are probably going to be in that same situation, right? And I'm saying this from a simple standpoint of, like you said, he can only emphasize things. He can't go out there and play for them. He can't go out there and make layups for them. He can't go out there. He can change the scheme in terms of defense and stuff, but they got to execute the scheme, right? And so I think that is part of the problem too. They're not executing the scheme, and obviously Jenkins has to adjust his scheme defensively. But I mean, to your point about the players that they have, like this all falls on like two people that are not even playing right now, I think are the biggest issues with the team or why this start has happened. And I'm just going to start with the dude who makes the decisions, Zach Kleiman. Why are we not talking about Zach Kleiman? I keep hearing everything about these coaches and nobody's talking about Zach Kleiman in the roster that he's constructed. Because you're saying, hey, we need more offensive production. We need more offensive production. And we have people that are playing that shouldn't be playing as much. This all goes to the person that makes the decisions. Like, yeah, we literally, no disrespect to these players that we're talking about. Jake LaRavia, Vince Williams, all those players, like they are, like you said, like Vince Williams was playing over Jake LaRavia. To me, it's the same thing. They're not the same players in the sense of same skill sets, but the same players in the sense of they're players that shouldn't need to be playing right now. Because if you're talking about what the Grizzlies have talked about this whole time is they're trying to win a championship. And while Smart was a good addition to what they do, and I think he's been good, I feel like they're just sitting on certain things, or they were, I won't say twiddling the thumbs, but they didn't prepare as best as they could for this type of situation to happen. because now you have guys that are overexerting themselves. You're talking about Zaire Williams needing to be scoring more. And while he does need to score more, he shouldn't have to be in this position to score that much at this stage of the season. He was more so supposed to be like a utility guy or connector, things of that nature. Xavier Tillman, another guy who I think has been good. He's been overexerting himself. Legs have been tired on dead on offense because he has to play basically 30 minutes and guard all these people, and you have no backup big. Now, granted, we're signing Biyombo, that's cool, but you should address that before because you already knew going into this season, BC was going to be out for most of the season. Now, while Adams was not out, you knew the risk of Adams also being out because I remember them saying he didn't want to get surgery, and they tried to work through all that. You knew there was a risk of, hey, we might have to do the surgery. So if he didn't get the surgery, he would then be out. No disrespect to these players, but why? I understand Kenny Lofton being on the roster in March, right? They want to reward him. But if you knew all this, then on top of that, knew John Morant was going to be out. You basically have 3 guys that are making like $80 million of your dollars on just dead money. Like it's not going to be there. It's not going to be your use. And you don't have that much money to be playing around with because those are main rotation guys. So now every roster spot counts. And no disrespect to Kenny Lofton, but he was a two-way guy. Why is he still on the roster when you still need actual NBA players? Because now you're putting yourself in a position where you're dependent on too many first and second year guys that are not ready for these minutes. And then we're asking them to play above what they are when they haven't even got enough experience to know who they are as a player. And so that's where I get this frustration because it's like you never really prepared for this situation anyway. And so now where everybody's talking about these players need more offensive production. Yeah, that's cool. Like I want them to produce more. They need to be better. Like Roddy don't need to miss layups. Jake needs to be better, but they shouldn't even be on the court. And now you're just, now you're basically having to find different ways to not play him. Like you said, getting Santi back, getting Luke back is going to be cool. I think that's the thing that really hurt them too. Like, because those guys are going to play like 20 something minutes. So, that makes Jake that makes Jake and Roddy's minutes less. But even then, you probably, in my opinion, still needed like another 1 to 2 extra rotation guys on this roster, and you don't. And now, again, like you can't plan for certain injuries, but you knew certain risks were there, and you didn't mitigate those risks. So now you're in this situation because you didn't, outside of Smart and Rose, you didn't add anybody. And you already had 2 guys on the IR, or one guy on the IR, and then another one that was potentially could have been an IR, and then one that was going to miss the first 25 games, and he's your best player. And you did nothing necessarily to make that, mitigate that risk of, hey, Luke and Santi out. Now, it's basically everybody got to stay healthy now, or else your margin of error just becomes even slimmer. So, yeah, that's really where I'm at with Zach. Like, he's got to be better in that sense because, again, while these players are young, your best players are 24, 25, and we'll talk about the concern level and stuff. You got to get to a point where if you're really serious about saying you want championships, you have to make the moves to do that. And while he did have a good start with Smart, you have to do more. Smart can't just be the one and just say, hey, we're good. That's the championship move. Like, no, you have to make more. And I hope he's seeing that you have to make more. Because I understand we've always developed and had people be able to take leaps, but usually we only have 1 or 2 guys make a leap. We're dependent on 3 or 4 guys to make a leap. And that's just kind of unrealistic in today's NBA, especially if you're trying to contend for a championship like you say you are. So he's got to fix that. He's got to fix that first, more than anything. The person that makes the roster, he's got to fix that and change his mindset a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest fault would be that they didn't sign a backup big until now, especially when you see the fact that Taylor Jenkins has been reluctant to use Kenneth Lofton Jr. as well. And also that's another thing is that Kenneth Lofton Jr., even at his size, he needs to be out there with another big as well. He's not somebody who can really go out there and play the 5. So really coming into the season, just like, and I've said it before, like I really felt like they just needed another 7-foot dude on the team. Like Jaren is the only dude on the team over 7 feet tall. Santi is, he's a big body as well, but he's also still more of a finesse guy. But I think that adding him is going to help. It's going to help the front court rotation a lot. And like you said, Xavier Tillman won't have to play as many minutes just because Santi will be out there with him as well. But I still feel like they needed another traditional center, which is why I'm glad they're going to sign Biyombo, which I said we'll probably talk about that kind of like at the end of this. But I did want to get into what is the level of concern for the Grizzlies right now. I'll say for the current roster, like right now, before Ja gets back, before Santi gets back and stuff like that. The concern level is as high as it needs to be. It's at 9, 10, whatever you want to say, just because. But I'm talking about for these next 3 or 4 games, right? Uh, we don't know exactly when Santi's going to get back. He's supposed to be doubtful and everything like that. We know that Ja's not going to get back until at least December. So for this stretch, like, it's going to be really tough for them, especially when you see how bad the offense have been, the defensive struggles. I don't think they're going to give up 18 threes a game for the season. If they do, they're going to be really bad. I don't see that happening. My level of concern for the entire season as a whole isn't that high. I mean, I'm still concerned. I'll probably say like a 5 or a 6, you know what I mean, for the season as a whole. But I still think that just overall adding Ja is going to help a lot. And even though it's a horrible start, you're 0-5, but there's 82 games. Like, they do still have plenty of time to kind of turn it around. They can try to start with winning these 2 against the Trailblazers. Like, that's where you got to start. Is you got to get both of those games. I know it's on the road, and I know you haven't been good on the road, but that's got to be the mindset. Like, you got to go and you got to win both of those games. No offense to the Trailblazers, but they are a team that's a young team, got a lot of players. Don't even know if Scoot Henderson is going to be playing in that game. I know that he hurt his ankle a little bit, so we'll see how they treat that. So those are games that you got to try and win those games, right? But I still feel like they do have time to turn it around and everything like that. Obviously, the season is not over, but yeah, I mean, obviously, you start 0-5, you should be concerned. And I definitely am a little concerned for just the season as a whole. But my main thing is these first 25 games without Ja are going to be a struggle. Like, we knew it was going to be a struggle going into it. Knew that there's going to be some new stuff coming in and everything like that. But the rest of these next 20 games before Ja gets back, it's going to be tough, especially offensively. So that would be my main concern, is how bad are they going to be these first 25, and how big, kind of like, how big of a hole are they going to put themselves in? This is where, if you can start digging out of the hole now, it's much better than, obviously continuing to dig it deeper and everything like that, just so that when Ja comes back, it won't take like a Herculean effort from him to just put the team on his back and bring them to the playoffs and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Just stay attached. You know what I mean? Like, don't go down 7 games and stuff like that from the top of the West and everything. At least be there so that when Ja gets back, you can try to at worst be 3 or 4 games back. Like, that's kind of what I'm looking at. But right now, it just doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Like, if you take these first 5 games, it doesn't look like they have the personnel to do it. But I think, like I said, adding Santi, hopefully Luke Kennard will actually start making shots, which that's another thing. He's kind of on the same level as Jake for me. Not to say that he's, shouldn't be playing, but when I said defensively, he's not really bringing you anything. So you have to make shots to kind of mitigate that on the other side. So when he hasn't been making shots, like, I know it's his first, he's only played 2 games. So I still think he will start making shots eventually. But when he hasn't been making shots, it really just makes it really tough to have him out on the floor too. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that they're going to have to fix, especially before Ja gets back. But I would still say the level of concern for the season is not at an all-time high yet.
Yeah, I'm gonna start off by saying it's all gonna tie together. But what you talking about with the first or the last, or the not last, but the remaining games for Ja suspension? My second part of my rant was the other person to blame is Ja Morant. Now, granted, Ja is not the person making the roster decisions, right? I understand that. But at the time, you're new. Ja has to know this, right? Or not really know this, but understand this. The team wasn't in limbo, but you knew Dylan Brooks. You knew you lost in the first round, so you knew changes were going to come, right? You knew Dylan Brooks might not be here. You knew BC was going to be out. You knew maybe they didn't know about the Adam thing, but they knew, he could either not, even if he played, maybe have a lesser role. And you knew you were depending on young guys. So, and not only that, they said, hey, Ja, Jaren, Bang, you are the guys, and we need you to set the tone. So you would expect him to be ready for the first 25 games just offered before the suspension. But then once you get suspended, now that puts your team in a ball, behind the 8 ball. And my level of concern is probably a little bit higher because probably I'm gonna say like 8 to 7, more 7 to 8, because by the time you get back, it might not matter. Because now, granted, like you said, the season's not over, but I'm a big history guy, and I'm about to give some things. Listen, there have only been 15 teams that started 0-5 and end up making the playoffs. The last team to do that was the Lakers last year. And I'm pretty sure the Lakers are the only team to make the conference finals out of that 0-5 start, right? So, and not only that, like I said, they can do it because there's been some other teams that started 0-4. I think I got it up. The 2004, 2005 Chicago Bulls started like 0-9, and they ended up winning 47 games and finishing the 4th seed in the East. So it's not impossible, but the odds are very against you. You're just putting yourself behind the 8 ball. And for what they want to achieve, that is just hard to do. So I'm just being realistic in that sense. So it's not impossible. Like I said, it's been 15 teams, and the Lakers just did it last year. But it has to start now. It has to be something that starts now. And for me, if Ja's already out, and I've been saying, like, he already put himself or the team behind, like, in a bad situation because they don't have, like I said, the roster construction too. Along with that, it's like, where are they gonna get the points? That's really my biggest thing. Where is the offense gonna come from? Because I know you should beat Portland and you should beat I guess if I'm looking at it real quick, yeah, you play Portland next 2 games, then you got Miami and Utah at home. Like, you might be able to win those games because you're at home. But then after that, like, it's like Clippers, Lakers, Spurs, then it's Celtics. Like, it gets tough. And so, I had the prediction of this team being like at worst 15-10. They already halfway there at the loss column, like already. So, it's like, for me, it's like you said, I feel like it might get to a point where you get Ja back and he's going to have to put on a Hercules type of effort just to get the team into the play-in because the damage has already been done in the first 25 games. Again, you can start slow, but this is more than starting slow. This is like you're the only team that won a game. And in the Western Conference, where there's teams, like, especially in my opinion, where I think the 2 seed and like the 8 seed could be separated by 2 games, every game matters. And I hate to break it to you, there's no real easy game, like, at all, really, at least in the Western Conference. Is not. I know Portland might not have Scoop because I know he hurt his ankle last game, but Shaedon Stark still good. DeAndre Ayton still good. Like, they can still go off and they can still beat you, and you're in their place on the road. Like, and we're not being good on the road or last season, and we haven't been good this year. Obviously, we haven't won a game. So, and then I'm looking at these other teams. I mean, if you don't have Santi and Luke, like you said, if Luke's not making shots by, shoot, soon, like next game, and then obviously Santi will be back next week probably. Even then, they got to produce at like a high level. Like, the margin of error is just not there. And so my concern is, like, yeah, you might win some games and start to win, but it has to start in the stretch. Like, it has to start in the next probably 5 games, 5 to 7 games, in my opinion, because that's when you get to a point where you're just basically just really trying, like, your margin of errors is not there. It's already not there, but now it's going to even not be there in terms of making the playoffs. And again, if you want to make the playoffs, it's cool, but it's like you want to avoid the play-in too. So, like, it's just tough. It's tough. So my concern is very high for the season, not for the outlook. We can talk about outlook future pods. I'm not worried about the outlook of the whole thing, but at least for this season, yes. Because it's like, man, history tells you you're just behind the 8 ball already. And considering the context, unless they make some moves, you're just basically hoping for the team to play better and coach better, which I think they can. But even if they do, their margin of error is still so slim. Like, Jaren and Bane could still go off for 40 points, but like we saw, they both had 30 piece, and I think Smart had 20 something, and your bench didn't give you anything. You know what I mean? Like, margin of error is just not there. And then the other games, I think the first 2 games, I think the first game they played the Pelicans, they played well enough, but Jaren didn't play well enough, and they lost that game. Then the second game, they played decent enough, but I don't think Bane played well. And then you know what I mean? Like, it's always something happening in these games because they basically have to play perfect. And when that one thing slips up, they lose it. So, yeah, my concern is pretty high because it's like, man, you're just putting yourself behind the 8 ball. Now, granted, like I said, 0-5, we've seen it. Teams figure it out, but it's steep. It's steep. It's looking bleak. I'm just be honest. It's looking very bleak. So they got to get it together soon. Or else it's going to just continue to be a thing where we're like, man, we're thinking Ja's going to save the season. And by the time he gets there, the season might already be over. Not over. You still got to play the games, but over in the sense of what they're trying to achieve. So, yeah, it's pretty high for me. I'm going to say a 7 or 8.
Nah, I got you. No, I'm with you. And I agree just because it's going to be hard if they put themselves kind of too far behind the 8 ball, kind of like you said, and they continue to lose these games and stuff like that. It's going to be difficult. And that's why I said, like, I not to say that my level of concern isn't high, like obviously maybe slightly lower than what yours is, but I think that I'll know a lot more in these next 2 games. They got to win these next 2 games, right? Because the difference between 2-5 and 0-7 is huge. You know what I mean? Like you can't.
Wait, hold on. Sorry for cutting you off. Just win one. First off, just win one, and then
that's true. Win a game.
One game at a time.
Win a game. Yeah, that's what we're gonna start at. Is win a game. Being the last team in the NBA without a win is just like that's not acceptable. Like, and that's really my main thing that I'll continue to say is that obviously, like, even if they were 1-4, man, just winning a game, man, it just will make me feel so much better about the team right now. It's just like the fact that they haven't won a game, it's just really tough. And especially because of the way they've lost some of these games. And I think it really does get tough just because there have been some times where it's like against the Jazz, it really felt like they just lost the first quarter. Like they lost the first quarter and the game was over, right? You can look at some of those. It's like you lose one of the quarters, and for 3 quarters, you might play okay or maybe even good enough to win the game. But you just put yourself, like you said, for the season, but just for games, like you put yourself behind the 8 ball because now you got to come out and you got to, come back from down 15 in the second half, and you already don't have enough offense to do that. So that's really been another one of my main issues that I've seen is that they'll either, whether it's like the first quarter or the second quarter, usually it has been, they just get blitzed. Like they've been blitzed in the second quarter. They got blitzed in the first quarter against the Jazz. And then basically the rest of the game, they were trying to come back, but they just never really could. I mean, you're on the road. It's not, the Grizzlies do not do well in Utah just in general. I don't know what their record is, but as somebody who's watched a lot of Grizzlies games in Utah, I can promise you it's not very good. They do not win a lot of games there, especially these last couple of years. I know last year they went there and lost 2 early season games to them too in Utah. So it's just like that's just not a good matchup for them. So even going into that game after 0-4, I was like, yeah, that's going to be a tough game. They haven't had great history against the Trailblazers on the road either. So that's why, even though the Trailblazers are not that same team that they have been in the past, that was going to the playoffs and had Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, who might be the greatest Grizzly killer of all time, right? They don't have that, but you're still going on the road where the Grizzlies have struggled, and they're playing a team with some really good young players. So I get why, like, so it's not going to be an easy game. Like you said, there's no easy games in the Western Conference. The Western Conference keeps getting more difficult. The Clippers just added James Harden to just continue to add to how difficult the Western Conference is going to be. So it's just, if they want to start, like, to start turning the season around, it has to start now. Not to say that the season is already over and all that, because I know there's a lot of people that have been saying stuff like that. I'm not there yet, obviously, but you've got to start stringing some games together now. Like because if you don't start now, like you said, it's just going to be too much when Ja does get back. And even if Ja does get back, there's no telling. I mean, this is the NBA. There's probably going to be other injuries. Other guys are going to be out. And I think that's another thing, another issue that adds to my level of concern is that, and knew this coming into the season, they're not as equipped to handle injuries as they have been in the past. So the days of, the Grizzlies are missing 4 and 5 starters, and now they're going to be fine. You know what I mean? Because that's how it was a couple of years ago. And I think coming into the season, even like from a coaching staff perspective, from a general manager's perspective and stuff like that, they probably thought, okay, the team and the coaching staff has dealt with injuries the entire time. They've done a really good job, but they just don't have, this is not the same team. Like, this team is mostly completely different from that team that was 2 years ago that won all those games without Ja. There's no Tyus Jones, no Dylan Brooks, no DeAnthony Melton, no Kyle Anderson. Those are really the guys that stepped up in that. I mean, you still have Jaron and Bain, but you don't have as much around them. And I'll exclude Marcus Smart from that because I think Marcus Smart has played, especially on the offensive end, probably about as well as you could probably expect from him for somebody who's played his first 5 games with a new team. I don't think he's been the reason they've been losing games. I still feel like that's more of the people that are coming off the bench not giving the starters enough help. Another thing I will say, I think the rotations have been a little questionable. Uh, Not necessarily like the amount of minutes people are playing, but more the times when people are coming in and out of the game. I feel like Coach Jenkins has taken players out of the game at the wrong times. So, right, like the Grizzlies are going on a run, and it's like, okay, now this is when I want to get Bane some rest. Where it's like, well, maybe you call a timeout here, keep him in for a couple more minutes, then you try to get the rest. See if you can try to keep that run going a little bit with some bench guys in there with Dez or some bench guys in there with Jaren. There should never be a time where Bane, Jaren, and Smart, all 3 of them are on the floor. And I think that's the number one thing I've noticed. Like, you've got to have at least one of those guys on the floor at all times, or it's going to get really nasty offensively. And I think that's been one of the issues as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff to get into. Then we'll continue to follow this the next couple of weeks. But, yeah, just a tough start overall. And that's all I can really say.
Yeah, it's just tough. It's very tough because like you said, it's just they gotta figure it out. And like with the last coaching point, that's why I was saying with the coaching, it can be better. I wasn't trying to say Jenkins was flawless and doesn't deserve any blame. Like I said, I'm blame pies. I think it's, if you ask me, it's Ja climbing at like 40 apiece, and then 20% is the other, which is players and coaches. And Jenkins got to be better in that sense of, because I think there was a game, I think it was the Washington game, where I think started the 4th, and they had like an all bench lineup in there when they were making a run. Like I didn't see Jaren, or Bane out there, and that kind of cost you the game. And that's why I was talking about margin of errors. That little mistake probably cost you the game. Not saying that you would have for sure won the game, but you dang sure weren't gonna win it if you just kept that lineup out there, and they did. So like little stuff like that, I think, yeah, that's probably, I'd say, like the not really the rotations, but the timing of them, like the feel of them, like the game feel. Instead of going by like, hey, this guy can only play a certain amount of minutes, probably need to go like, hey, we need to extend his minutes a little bit more. And I will say they have, because they haven't really used it. They used to play guys like low 30s, guys kind of playing like mid 30s now. But again, that's because the roster, like I keep saying, like again, obviously you shouldn't be 0-5. So that's why I say players and coaches got to be better. Like I always say, like it's hard for me to be too mad at certain things when I'm seeing G League 2-way guys out there. Like he doesn't got much to work with. But again, those guys have to be better in those minutes. That's just the reality of the situation. Even though I think he should have more to work with, he's got to be better in getting those guys prepared. Like I said, with the rotations and overhelping and stuff like that. So yeah, man, it's tough. It's tough. But again, like I said, like the season's not over. Like I said, it's bleak, but that doesn't mean like the season's just done. I just gave the numbers. Hey, like listen, history. Like teams have started 0-5 and been fine and still make the playoffs. It's early in the season. You got 82 games. Like seasons ebbs and flows. Like you'll have stretches like this where we had stretches like that last year, but like it's just that bad stretch we had last year is happening at the beginning of this year. So it's just different. So, but yeah, it's not like all doom and gloom. Like we could be here next week and they could be like, I don't know, 4-5 or whatever, and that'd be cool. And then it's different. But right now they don't have no win. So just get one. That's my biggest thing. Get one first. Everybody keep talking about when Ja get back. Listen. That's like in December, bro. Can we just get one win? I've been on Twitter talking about, hey, keep quoting the same video, waiting on a win. I'm gonna do it tomorrow too. Y'all probably gonna laugh at me. I'm gonna do it every time until they win a game, because everybody's doubting them. I need them to just win one game first. I feel like when they win one game, it's just everything's just gonna just start flowing a little bit better. I'm not saying they're gonna go on like a 20-game win streak, but they'll start feeling better. Confidence will go up. It feel like just a weight off their shoulders. So just win one first, and then everything else we'll worry about everything else after that. Just win one game first. So that's really my biggest point. Just win one.
For sure. Yeah, that's my biggest thing too. Just to get a win. Hopefully it'll be against the Trailblazers and everything like that. But last thing, did want to mention this. I know we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but the Grizzlies did officially sign Bismack Biyombo to a 1-year deal. $1 million of that is guaranteed, and then it seems like there's going to be some kind of option for him if he plays the rest of the season. I think they did give him maybe a little bit more than people were expecting because that option would take him up to $5 million on the season. But I think one of the reasons they did that is it would make it so that at the trade deadline, if they did need money to work for a deal or something like that, they could use Biyombo in a deal of some kind of caliber, and they could add a little bit more money in the deal than they would have for some of these younger players that they have. If they wanted to use them in a deal, maybe if they even wanted to use them in a deal, they can't because they're on rookie contracts. So this might help them a little bit of that. They do also have a trade exception and everything, but that's really like looking far ahead. For the right now, I think Bismack Biyombo can help the Grizzlies simply as a rebounder and just as another big body out there on the court. Jaren is not a 5, and I think that the Grizzlies' defensive scheme is basically like it. If you don't have another guy out there with Jaren to really be the center and to focus on, getting the rebounds and stuff like that. Not to say that Jaren doesn't also need to get better at that. And I think he has been better as a rebounder so far this season. I think he can continue to get better at that. But when your scheme is so precedented on Jaren being the last line of defense and Jaren protecting the rim, it's hard for him to do that and also get the rebound. And that's what I always, try to tell people. Not to say that he can't be better, but sometimes it's not realistic for him to do all of that. You can't ask him to switch and do all this and then also be the best rebounder on the team. It can be hard sometimes. But like I said, he's been better. I think he can continue to get better. But I think having Biyombo out there just to have a body out there that'll box people out, get some boards. He's a really good defender overall. Not going to help you on offense. Like, he's not going to help you on offense simply, right? And no offense to him, but we know that. Like, that's not what you sign him to be. He's not going to do the same level of like passing and stuff that Steven Adams will, kind of like at the elbow. But I think he will be good as a screener and everything. I think he'll set good screens. He'll set hard screens. And I think he's the type of player that I think Grizzlies fans are going to, like, they'll come around to love Bismack Biyombo, I feel like, just because he's a high motor guy. He's going to hustle. He's going to block shots. He's going to rebound. And he's not going to play outside of his role. So if you see a night where if Bismack Biyombo ends up taking more than like 5 shots, that means he either made all the ones he took before that or he missed one. Like, you're not going to have a night where Bismack Biyombo goes 2 for 7. If he's attempting 7 shots, he's going to have made 6 of them because he's gotten a rhythm and they're all going to be at the rim. So that's the kind of guy that you're going to get in Bismack Biyombo. And I think he can really help. I think he can really help the team, especially in this first little time, because they have a size disadvantage and they need somebody else that can come and spell Xavier Tillman for a little bit, or maybe even start over Xavier Tillman at times, just because I feel like he's a little bit bigger. He's not quite 7 foot, but he has a really long wingspan. I think he has like a 7'7" wingspan. So that's going to help them a lot in terms of just having a guy that can go up and get boards and contest shots at a little bit of a higher rate than what Tillman can do, just because he is undersized to really be the 5. But I think Biyombo can help them a lot. Now, like I said, he's not going to fix the offensive issues. And I'm not saying the Grizzlies are going to add Bismack Biyombo and he's going to save the season. But I do think he will help them. And I think when you look at the guys that were available and like the prices you would have to do, whether it's like trading for somebody else or something like that, I think this was a good first step in terms of kind of trying to fix that issue. It's late. I feel like they should have been trying to fix this way earlier. They should have been trying to fix this in the offseason, but it is what it is. This is kind of where they're at. But I think they made a mistake by not adding somebody earlier on, but now that we're here, I think adding Bismack Biyombo is a solid move for them. And I don't think there's anybody else out there that would have been better.
Yeah. First, I want to give a shout out to Anthony Sane. Shout out to Sane. That's my dog. Because I can't remember what episode it was. I was watching this podcast. I think it was like a week or two. It was probably a couple weeks ago. And he said something about this feels like when Adams got hurt. He said something like this feels like a Bismack Biyombo type situation. And when I heard that, I was like, Bismack Biyombo. And then I forgot that he was a free agent. And because I'm like, then I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh yeah, that's sign somebody because I forgot that they could sign somebody after the 5 games. I'm like, and then once I thought about it, I'm like, I couldn't unthink about it. I just thought, well, yeah, Bismack's probably gonna be like. I just felt like if that was like the name, and sure enough, at like was I think a couple days ago or whenever they called it, I can't remember what day exactly, but it's like Bismack Biyombo signed the Grizzlies. So it's just funny because I couldn't get out of my head. I'm like, he's probably gonna be a Grizzly. But I mean, I think he's gonna help. Like, it's just the thing is like you said, he's not gonna provide enough offensively. Like he's only average. I got the stats up. He's only averaging 5 points for a career. Like he's not going to. That's not his game. Like his game is rim protection and rebounding. Like he's averaged a block everywhere he's been. Basically, his rebounds have been pretty good for what his minutes are. Like the last couple of years, he's only played 14 minutes game. That's probably what he's gonna play here. I think last year he started 14 games, so he had a couple decent starts. Like again, he's undersized. Like I think he's the same height as Tillman, or maybe like an inch taller, like 6'8", 6'9". But he has a long wingspan. He's probably a little bit more athletic, a little bit more built. So that'll help. Like again, and I don't think necessarily they're going to change any starting lineups. I just don't think I don't think they're going to start Biyombo. They're not going to do that. But I think he'll play. Like his 14 minutes will make a difference because that'll give Tillman a breather or Jaren a breather, or when Santi gets back, Santi a breather. And I think that'll increase their margin of error because instead of giving those minutes to guys like Lofton, who again, who I think can be good for what the team needs at that position, it doesn't fit. Biyombo can provide that and what they need. And so that maybe can increase your margin of error that I keep talking about that they don't have. And I think again, from what I've seen, like I think he's a good locker room guy. I mean, he's a vet. He's been in the league since 2011, 2012. Like he's a guy that, understands, like you said, he won't play without like outside of his role. Like maybe there was a couple times, I can't remember when I think the Grizzlies played Charlotte a couple years ago and he took like a 3. And I don't know if you know about the video, but like the Charlotte announcer like said something about him taking the 3. Like that's maybe like the only time I've seen him play outside of his role was like a couple seasons ago. But for the most part, you'll never see him play outside of his role. Like you said, he shoots for the most part. Career percentage is 53% because again, a lot of his stuff is at the rim. It's going to either be a layup or a dunk. You know what I mean? Maybe a hook, maybe occasionally here and there, but he'll be in the dunker spot most of the time or pick and roll. So I think he's going to help. And I think the contract thing, like they said, I think if I'm not mistaken, Bobby Marks did talk about it. Like they made his contract like that because of the trade stuff that could happen. Because I think he's trade eligible on February 2nd. So if they do keep him when Jai gets back, they can use him as a trade asset. And then on top of that, I'm pretty sure the Grizzlies still have, if I'm not mistaken, like I think a trade exception and an injury exception. So they got some little stuff to work with wiggle room wise if they wanted to make some moves at the deadline. But again, that's further down the line. Just get a win first. So hopefully I don't know when Biyombo's gonna play. Like that's a real big thing. I mean, he's already signed. He's obviously signed officially, but I don't know when he's gonna play. I would like to see him playing these next 2. Maybe I don't know if he's gonna play tomorrow. Definitely, I don't think he's playing no later than Sunday. Like I think Sunday he'll probably play. But yeah, I think he's gonna help. I just hope that again, he's not going to be the person that saves the season or anything, but he sure can help in turning things around at least. Like they said, like you said, they should have got a big sooner. Y'all heard me just rant for 30 minutes saying they should have got a big sooner or just actual rotation players. But this is the reality situation. They better late than never. So, you know what I mean? I'll take it. For what considering the context of the situation, I'll take Biyombo right now. So, yeah, I think he'll help. A good addition. I think that's probably the only name I really wanted. Because again, you weren't going to make a long-term move right away. You just needed something to be a gap filler, and this was like probably the best gap filler move you could make. So yeah,
For sure, for sure. And like I always say every week, I just want to say thank you to everybody who listened to this episode of the Next Gen Podcast. Hopefully next week we will have some wins to talk about. Maybe we will have Bismack Biyombo's debut as a Memphis Grizzly. We'll see if he does play this weekend playing against the Trailblazers. But if he doesn't, I would definitely expect him to be back for the next home game. I know the Grizzlies do like to do that, a lot of stuff like that. But as always, I'm your host, Bryson Wright, and I was joined by my co-host, Alex Winton. And we will see y'all on the next episode, and hopefully we'll have some Grizzlies wins to discuss.